Hello everybody, I would like to welcome you to another session in the Reform Symposium, and we have today Adam Simpson. Adam has been fortunate enough to spend the last 12 years of his journey as a lifelong learner working with others in what some call the language classroom. He is currently privileged to have the opportunity to help young adults meet their educational goals at Sabancı University in Istanbul. His professional interests include flexibility within the curriculum and the considered use of technology in the classroom. And his session today is, I am an EAP teacher, but who am I? Very interesting. So the floor is yours, Adam.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Ayat. Very kind of you. First of all, I'd just like to say, apologize in advance. I'm a little bit ill at the moment, so if I don't come across totally clearly, then I apologize. Yeah, I've got a bit of a sore throat and a blocked nose, but I've taken medication, so I should be okay for the next 40 minutes or so. Okay. All right, let's begin. Okay, so as I was so kindly introduced to you, this is my session today. I'm an EAP teacher, but who am I? Okay, so this is basically my session is me discussing how I found myself as a teacher and the origins of kind of my teaching philosophy and how it might help other people in a similar position to sort of think about their teaching. Okay. All right. Before we get started properly, I'd just like you to take a look at this little sort of brain teaser, really. Okay. Just have a quick look at this, and I'm not going to give you the answer until the end of the session. So it's a little bit of sort of an attempt to try and get you to stick around until I've finished. Okay. Okay. So let's look at this together. A man who lives on the 10th floor takes the elevator down to the first floor every morning and goes to work. When he comes back in the evening, if there are other people in the elevator, he goes to his floor directly. Otherwise, he goes to the 7th floor and walks up 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. So, can you explain why he does this? Any ideas? Okay, I'm hoping that's going to give you something to think about while I'm talking during my session. Okay, I'm not going to give you the answer now. Like I said, I'm going to give you no idea. A bit of exercise. That's a very good answer, Ayat. But no, that's not correct. Oh. Okay, so like I said, this is something you're just going to have to think about. I'm not going to give you the answer until the end. A couple of very good suggestions there, but no one's got the correct answer yet. Okay, so yeah, he takes the elevator down. On the way back up in the evening, he goes to the 7th floor and walks up the last 3 flights of stairs. So why? Okay, there's not actually anything really to do with my session, but I just thought it would get the old creative juices flowing in your minds and get ready for the rest of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so, that's a fantastic suggestion, Clive. I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong yet, but okay, something for us to think about. Okay, so where are we? Yeah, so I'm an EAP teacher, but who am I? Okay, still more suggestions coming on that. All right, I'm not going to tell you, so please don't get too frustrated. All right? Okay, so who am I? All right, well, first of all, I'm Adam. I work in Istanbul, Sabancı University, at the School of EAP teacher. Is everybody familiar with the term EAP? If I say EAP, do you all know what I mean? Okay, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. English for academic purposes. So basically, I teach 18, 19, 20-year-olds how to speak, write, listen, read in an academic context. English abroad program. I wish. I wish it were that simple. Academic. Yes, there we go. Thank you. All right. So let me get on to this. Okay. So I'm starting off here with a short stanza from a famous piece of writing called Two Rivers, and this kind of sort of sums up my philosophy of teaching. So let's just have a quick look at this. And I'm going to read it to you in as dramatic a voice as I can manage. Here we go. Okay, so forth and brighter fares my stream. Who drink it shall not thirst again. No darkness taints its equal gleam, and ages drop in it like rain. So, when I got to thinking about how I teach and the philosophy behind my teaching, I discovered that I was actually basing a lot of what I do on really ancient philosophies, and this seemed to me to be like quite a good analogy of a river, and a river growing and getting stronger and being a source of life and feeding people. So sorry if that seems a bit pretentious, but I thought it was quite a nice way to get started today. So what am I going to talk about in the next half an hour, 40 minutes? These are the areas I'm going to try and cover. I'm going to look at a bit of history of the language classroom and the classroom in general, actually, not just the language classroom. I'm going to think about the constraints that we all face as a result of these, the physical and mental aspects of the classroom. I'm going to think about what I did to overcome this, and therefore the educational theories that I believe in and I espouse. I'm going to say a little bit how these theories sort of feed into my teaching. Then I'm going to give you a few ideas on how perhaps you can do the same if you're in the same position as me. Okay, so question number one. Well, I've already asked you a question, haven't I? Okay, first proper question. Can you name this country? Look at the picture. Can you name it? Okay, shall I turn off the video for now? I'm sure you don't need to look at my face all the time. If I turn it off, you're going to see a picture of me anyway. There you go. Is that better? Facebook? Okay, all right, so I'll proceed from now on just with me talking and that wonderfully handsome picture of me instead of the video. Turkey? No, good suggestion. No, that's not Turkey. No, sorry, it's definitely not Turkey. Okay, that little bit at the top, sort of towards the left-hand side, is modern-day Denmark, and below that is modern-day Germany. Prussia. Oh, okay, we have a winner. Okay, thank you. Leah, am I right there? Thank you, Prussia. Fantastic. Yes. Okay. Aha. Okay. Russia. No. Well, a bit of Russia, I suppose. Yes. Don't feel too bad if you didn't get that, because this country hasn't existed for more than a century. So don't feel too bad if you didn't get that. But this country, Prussia, plays an incredible part in all of our teaching, if you knew that or not. Okay, the Kingdom of Prussia was incredibly important for a huge number of reasons. And if you're not familiar with the history of the Prussian system, you might be in for one or two surprises in the next few slides. Okay, so the ancient country, which is largely modern-day Germany, completely, and I mean completely, brought about the American education system and the Japanese education system, and also it influenced pretty much every other country in the world. So what you're doing in class now, the physical environment, a lot of the constraints placed on you originated in Prussia. So let's take a look at these few images. What do we see here? Okay, we have some idea of the physical shape of the classroom. We have some young people being taught something. Of course, we have exams, and we have a whole range of subjects. And all of these things were brought about by the Prussian education system. So let me move on and give you a few details. Okay, so why is Prussia so important in the history of our teaching? It was an incredibly forward-facing nation. And if we're going back to the mid-18th century, if I'm not mistaken, the year is 1763, but that's probably a bit too much detail for you now. So yeah, in the mid-18th century, that's all we needed to know. Prussia was fantastically forward-facing and really quite innovative. At this time, they introduced tax-funded compulsory primary education. This was called the Volksschule. Pardon me if my German is not, the German pronunciation is not spot on. Yeah, so they got the idea of getting taxpayers' money to pay for schooling. And at the same time, they made schooling compulsory for children between the age of 5 and 13, and this had never happened before. And this is where we got the origins of the reading, writing, and arithmetic that we all know so well. This is where it all came from. And this was the first nation to do this. Then, if we go on in time a little bit, so we're going towards the early part of the 19th century. This happened around 1806. But again, the numbers aren't that important today. So, all right, what was happening in the early 19th century? Well, by this time they had just loads and loads of schools, and these were all owned by the state. Now, this was quite a multicultural country, and it spanned across a lot of Europe, and there were many different languages. But what they did was they said, well, actually, you know, we need all these schooling to be done in one language, so they imposed an official language. And they did a very good job, actually, of making sort of a lot of patriotic feeling, because they trained all these people, and they gave them a decent education, which no other country had done before. And it created a great deal of loyalty. And it churned out all these people that would end up in their army and working for bureaucracy. And it did a very, very good job of this. And the Prussian system was really important because it actually, for the first time in history, we saw a nation training its teachers and bringing about this wonderful sort of collection of educators who all actually knew the job really quite well. But on the other side, and these are things which might sort of, we definitely, most of us still see, for the first time in history we had this compulsory attendance. People had to come, they had to sit in their chairs at a certain time of day for a certain number of days. There was a national testing system for the first time. And we saw a national curriculum for each grade at school. So, an incredible influence on a lot of countries in the future. So, and this is something we still feel today. So 200 years down the line, what do we see? So imagine what was happening in this country at that time. Let's go back a slide. There, think of all these things. How many of these do we still see today? So what constraints can we still see in our current education systems? Okay, so I'd just like you to tap away in the chat box. What kind of influences from this system do you think we can still see? Very good, Clive. Yes, I completely agree. I'm going to write exactly the same thing. Yes, everything. We're 200 years down the line now, and things haven't really changed a great deal. So, what does that mean? Look, that's me. How happy do I look in that picture? Okay, yes, no iPads in sight. Okay, Headway, sorry, yeah, I know. I should mention, of course, other course books are available. I just happened to get that picture of me with a certain book that we all know very, very well. Yes. So yeah, a lot of the constraints we see today, having to be in a classroom, having to conform to certain curricula, having to use books, all of these things, attendance, everything originated 200 years ago when people were trying to churn out soldiers with a certain degree of education. And not a great deal has changed in all that time, to be honest. So yeah, look at me. Look how unhappy I am. Those Prussians are to blame, you know? Yes. Okay, so I got to thinking, well, I'm stuck in this system. I work in a situation which is dominated by exams. We have a curriculum. The students have to be in class at a certain time. The bell rings, they come in. The bell rings again, they leave. Very similar to being in prison, if we're really honest about it. So, what can I do? As things were going on, and as my teaching career developed, I was just thinking, well, I'm not happy. This isn't really working for me. And more importantly, this isn't really working for my students either. So, okay, yes, Headway, just that comment. Do you know how many copies of Headway have been sold while we're at it? Anybody want to write a number in before I move on? Too many. Okay, well, who's to say? Who's to say? Too many. Way too many, yes. As many as the Bible. I'm going to quickly type in a number. Okay, I hope you're all sitting down and ready to be shocked. Here we go. 70 million. 70 million copies of Headway. That was a couple of years ago, actually, so that number's probably increased by now. But anyway, that's a complete aside to what I want to say. But it's probably definitely a symptom of the Prussian education system that we all find in. Yes, that's my thoughts exactly. Holy guacamole. Yes. So that's definitely a symptom of the Prussian education system, that this book has had such an effect on our lives as language teachers. And it's one that I didn't really want to allow to dominate my entire teaching career. So I started thinking about this, and I started to teach differently. Participating in tree genocide. Okay, all right, I'm going to move on from the Headway thing. I'm not going to respond to any more of your comments, as funny as they might be. Okay, so when I got to thinking about my teaching, I thought, well, I can't be doing this. I can't be going along with the way things are, because it's not helping me as a person and as a teacher, and it's not particularly helping my students. We no longer live in the early 1800s. I'm not training them to be soldiers or to work in industrial age factories. I have to get on and do something else. So how did I do that? Well, I started to research, and I started to look at educational theories that kind of fitted into what I'm doing as a teacher. And what I came up with was actually quite interesting. I realized that I wasn't doing anything new at all, and that what I was doing was something that had existed for nearly 1,000 years. All right, so I've got another map for you, another map quiz coming up, and I'm going to first of all talk about apprenticeship. I'm sure this is a word that's familiar to a lot of you, but you may not have thought about apprenticeship as something that you can apply to your classroom setting. And it's a big thing I'm going to be thinking about for the rest of my talk today, and I'm hoping to give you some thoughts about apprenticeship and make you think about it in a different way. Okay, so here we go. All right, so what do we see here? Actually, the answer some of you gave earlier, yay, there we go. The answer some of you gave earlier is now correct. This is Turkey, but it's not modern day Turkey. It's Turkey from about the 11th century. And at this time, I'm going to spell the name. This was the time of the Seljuk Turks. Now, Seljuk had quite an influence on this part of the world. And actually, that's a modern-day Turkish name. Seljuk, it's not a common name, but I've had quite a few students called Seljuk. So, you know, the influence of this time can still be felt in Turkey. And I was amazed to find out that a lot of my teaching philosophy comes from this time. So what I'm doing in class is basically 1,000 years old. So I apologize for not coming up with something totally original for today, but it might be of interest to you, I hope, to know that what I've been doing is grounded in ancient theory. Okay, so this is Turkey from before the Crusades, and what was going on there is something that I try and do in my class now. Okay, so apprenticeship. Really? Is that something that I can apply to my classroom? Okay, well, all right, I've chosen the Seljuk Turks from history and their apprenticeship model, but basically apprenticeship goes on around the world, and it's not anything that we have never heard of, and you know, it's not a completely new theory. But I'm going to look into it a little bit in detail and give you some thoughts about it to show you that actually it's something that perhaps we can peer teaching. There you go, Farhad, thank you very much. Yeah, that's something I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on. Yeah, apprenticeship is something that we can perhaps look at as a way of increasing our involvement with the learners and a way forward from the outdated Prussian model. Okay, so I live in Turkey, so I've chosen the Turkish system as an example. Okay, so a little bit of background. The apprenticeship model has 3 levels. We have the absolute apprentice, which in this Turkish model is called the çırak. Then, once you've started to learn a bit or two, you have the kalfa, who's in the middle. And then, once you've become the master, kalfa, did I get that right? Okay. And then in the middle, we have and at the end, we have the usta, who is the master. And, okay, thank you, Farhad. Okay. All right. I'm glad to have somebody in the audience to correct me on my Turkish pronunciation. Okay, so once you've become an usta, you are the absolute master, you're the expert. And then you can take on new chiraks to train and raise to your level. And it's this idea of taking people and raising them to your level of expertise and knowledge which really appeals to me in this situation. Okay, so let's take a look at these 3. So we have, on the left, we have a typical apprentice, the çırak. In the middle, we have the gentleman cutting the hair, okay, and he's in the mid-stage, he's the kalfa. And on the right-hand side, we have an usta, we have an expert. And one thing that might sort of, you know, be obvious here is that you start off this process at a very young age, and then by the age of 25, you might be coming sort of, you're in the kalfa stage, and you might be ready to become an usta. And so this is sort of something that generally takes a long time to move through this this whole process. Okay, so let's go on. And what else you might notice from this is these people are all doing sort of hands-on work. They're doing a profession. Okay, so I don't know what the young gentleman on the left is doing. Something with a hammer. Then you've got a hairdresser, and then the usta on the right is making something that requires a lot of skill. I'm not sure what he's doing, but he's doing something that requires a lot of skill. Okay, so they're all doing hands-on work, and that's where apprenticeship usually sort of is. Pottery, yeah, I think so. I think so, Noel. Yes. So what we can see all about these is that these are sort of training examples. Okay, thank you, Ayat. I didn't know that it had a meaning in Arabic as well. Interesting. Okay, thank you. Yeah, the apprenticeship model, it's used more with training. It's the idea of you're entering a profession and we're going to train you from having absolutely no knowledge to being an expert, so you can then take on the next generation and train them. But a big thing I'm arguing today is that we can also use this in education. And I think this definitely is an educational model. Okay, so basically it's the process of learning through steady and developed integration. You take the young person without the knowledge and you slowly build up, and they get to understand every area of whatever it is, education, and they slowly become an expert. And they're also then part of the environment of that particular skill, and they're able to influence it as well. So I think it's a very interesting theory, and I'm going to give you some more details now. Okay, so here is just some a few definitions I found for apprenticeship learning. Okay, so the learner is in the actual physical environment in which they get to practice this. So if in our case it's language teaching, the learner is placed in an environment in which they need to use this in order to operate. Okay, if we go on to the second definition, yeah, it's very sort of problem-based. You give the learner a situation, or the learner realizes there is a situation. They then have to find a way to deal with it, and that, in terms of language, they have to find the language to be able to deal with the particular situation that they're faced in. And finally, I really like this last one here. The apprentice works alongside an expert. So it's the idea of there isn't one person who's better than the other just because they're the expert. They just happen to be the one with the knowledge, and they work together with this young person to, you know, so that they both end up with the same level of knowledge. I think that's a really nice idea, and one that is particularly pleasing to see in the apprenticeship model. Okay, so what's included in apprenticeship? Well, basically, we're trying to model proficiency. So we look at the situation and we see a particular model, and then that enables the young learner to become proficient in that particular situation. We also sort of scaffold it, so they start off at a certain level, and then we say, okay, we slowly remove the scaffolding, but all of these activities are authentic, and they're real life, and they're situations in which the learner would then have to, would probably have to operate at a later point. And of course, as they get better and better, they can say, okay, I've got this skill that works in one particular area, but I can take what I've learned from that and use it in a different one as well. So it's the idea of sort of using what they learn in multiple contexts as they develop and move on. Okay. So, as you can probably tell so far, I'm a bit of an, I'm quite an admirer of this idea of the apprenticeship model, but unfortunately, it's not one that's used very much in formal education. It's used much more in training. Can anybody think why? If you can think of a reason why we don't use apprenticeship, could you just type away in the chat box? Okay, is that Barbara there, yes? Group sizes. You've hit the nail on the head, actually. The Prussian model still dominates. It absolutely does. You're right. You're right. Yeah. Okay. So group size is one big thing. For apprenticeship, really, we only see it at the very top end. Perhaps you get some of it at the master's level, and then probably at PhD level, you would see this when one person works solely with an expert, and it's just down to it's not a very cost-effective way of educating people to have one expert work with one learner. takes too much time. Cost, yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. It's just basically, it's much easier to fill a room with 20, 30 people than it is to have one person working on one. So there are, you know, and these are fair enough. I mean, these are good enough reasons. But this is why we don't see this model as much as it might sort of work and look very nice in theory. Okay, so yeah. Nevertheless, I like it, and I think it's something that I'm very happy to have been influenced by in my teaching. Okay, and why? Okay, these are 3 reasons why. We work with the learner. They're not expected to figure out anything on their own. We are looking for the learner to have some input, but the teacher in this situation is a guide. Okay, and we sort of working together with my skill and the learner to raise them. And secondly, of course, they're learning what's appropriate, what they need to. Okay, so they're taking from the learning experience something that's actually going to be of use to them in their life. And finally, we're not looking for absolute perfection in this model. So what we're doing is saying, well, okay, I'm going to raise you up. I'm the expert. I'm raising you up to the level that I can. And of course, for example, if I were a driver, I wouldn't need to be such a good driver that I could win the Formula 1 World Championship. If I could drive a car without crashing and killing people, that would probably be enough. So it's the idea of raising people up to a sufficient level, okay, what we call the acceptable level of knowledge. Okay, so that's another thing that's important. So how does it work? And this is quite interesting, because if we go back to the PPP model of sort of language teaching, you know, when we sort of present, they practice and then they produce. This actually has quite a lot of similarities to that. So in phase 1 is modeling, where they just get to watch a performance of a particular sort of skill. Phase 2, they've kind of seen it and they can try it, maybe not with a great deal of success. Phase 3 is fading, where we imagine the baby who's taking their first steps. The parent would stand behind them to make sure they don't fall over and smack their head, but nevertheless the baby is taking its first steps on its own. So it's that kind of idea of slowly letting go and letting the learner try it on their own. Then in phase 4 we have self-directed learning, where the learner takes what they've learned and they feel a bit more confident to be able to do it. And then phase 5 of this theory, they're able to generalize. They say, okay, what I've learned in this context I can apply to different contexts. So that's basically how this works. Okay, so that's the notion of the apprenticeship model, and I'm going to now move on to my second main influence in my language teaching, and that is Dogma ELT. Whereas I have looked at one theory that's 1,000 years old, this one's somewhat more modern. Okay, so can I just ask one question? Do you know anything about Dogma ELT? I'm asking so I can sort of decide how much I should go into detail. So you can just write yes or no in the chat box. Unplugged, yeah. No. Scott Thornbury, not sure if it's a theory, no curriculum. Okay. Everything, okay. All right, I'm going to talk about it just generally without going into a great deal of detail. All right, so yeah, this is something that was developed initially by Scott Thornbury. He's the leading figure. Luke Meddings also is another person who's done a lot of work in this and written a very interesting book about it. Okay, so whereas the apprenticeship has goals and defined phases, which I just looked at, Dogma doesn't have this. And as you say, it may not even be called a theory at all. But it does have a set of principles, and these I'm going to introduce to you now. If I can move on. Okay. So dogme, the whole idea of it is the abandonment, or sort of the massive reduction in our dependency on course books and other such material, and it's more sort of a return to, well, let's talk, let's converse, and as we converse, I'll find out what you know of, and then we can sort of take your learning from that point. Okay, so again, as I'm going through this, I want you to sort of bear in mind what I talked about with the apprenticeship model, and we'll try and look to see if there are any comparisons, because I think there are. Okay, so first up we have interactivity, and it's the idea of the engagement between students and teachers is absolutely vital, and this is where learning happens. And secondly, we have engagement, so the idea, if they have a course book, it's very sort of passive and they're not sort of getting much out of it. But if they are creating or developing content themselves, they'll be more engaged and they'll learn more about it. Number 3, we have dialogic processes. So knowledge is co-constructed. So the teacher and the learner are working together, and in this way, knowledge is furthered. Okay, scaffolded conversations, number 4. Yeah, it's all about the conversation. It's all about talking, and this is where learning occurs, through the conversing between the teacher and the learner. Number 5, emergence, and this is one I'm going to talk about more later on because I'm still not entirely convinced about this. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Language and grammar emerge from the learning process. So this is not an attempt entirely to go through the acquisition like we do with our first language, but it's as conversations develop, new language emerges from the discussion. Okay, and we have 5 more, which I'll go through very quickly. All right, so affordances. What I mean by this is taking opportunities. So when you're in the classroom and something comes up, you take that opportunity. Okay, so when a student asks a question and it leads into, say, oh, okay, let's talk about this grammar or this vocabulary. It's just taking the opportunities that are presented in the classroom to teach something new. Okay, number 7, voice. Yes, the learner is as important a part of the process as the teacher. So their voice, their beliefs and knowledge are respected in the classroom. And that goes on to number 8 as well. So we're using the learner and their knowledge and everything. And we're not relying too much on published materials, textbooks, course books, like that. The student and the teacher are fundamental in this process. Number 9, relevance. And again, back to the course book, we're actually dealing with things that are relevant to the lives of the learners rather than what happens to be in the book. And then number 10, if and when we use materials, we look at them critically and think, well, what was the purpose of that? Okay, in what way was that biased towards the culture that presented it? So we're not just taking the materials we use at face value. Okay, so I kind of hinted, as I was talking about dogme, that I see some connections and some similarities between this ancient philosophy of apprenticeship and this relatively new call to arms, I've called it, of dogmeality. It's only been around a decade or so. Do you see any connections between these two? Okay, I'm very glad you said yes, because I do. If you'd all said no, I'm not quite sure what I would have done. Yeah, okay. So really, with dogme, I'm not 100% with everything that's said, but I do see some very clear similarities between this 1,000-year-old process where there's sort of more dialogue between the teacher and the learner, and knowledge is constructed together, and there's an attempt to sort of value the learner in the whole process. Okay. Hi, Fabiana. You're still welcome. Okay, don't worry, you haven't missed everything yet. So, okay. Okay, so how do these things work together? Okay, well, I think the main things about apprenticeship, which I like and which I try to sort of harness in my classroom, any activity you do is geared to the level at which the learner is physically and mentally stimulated in their environment. So basically, if it's too easy or if it's too difficult, then you're losing them. But you should, by working with them and asking them and discussing and conversing, you're able to see what they know, and you're able to move that, move their learning on and develop them as language learners. Number 2, sociality. Yeah, so it's all about getting them to look at you and you look at them as valuable resources rather than the book. So it's all about teaching the person and not teaching the book. So look at the person, the learner, and say, well, what do they have to give to this process? And they look at you and say, well, what do you have? You're not just the person who's interlocuting the book. And finally, we have authenticity. Yeah, so it's focusing on materials, if you use them, which are actual part of their life. Okay, what's that? It can't just be conversational. Okay, I'm going to come on to that definitely later on. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, Anna, that's great. Okay, so and then let's go the other way. What's espoused by dogme, and how does that sort of relate to the apprenticeship? Teaching is conversation driven. Now, I agree to this to a certain extent, but I think within EAP we have to think about other things as well. Number 2, a materials light approach. Again, materials light is very different to no materials at all, and that's something I will talk about again in a few minutes. Number 3, emergent language. Now, I do like the idea of this, and it's the idea of saying, well, what do you know now? How can I find out what you want? Can we sort of increase your learning and develop your language? Okay, so as I said, I still have some issues with both of these. All right, so I have to use a course book. I have to. It's, you know, they put it in my hand and they say, teach this, because they're going to be examined on it. So it's not always possible to say, right, let's converse, let's sort of see what language emerges, because, you know, a week or two from now, they're going to have to be tested on the contents of the book. So I can't do everything based around conversation. But we can do some. Okay, so it's sort of, you know, finding a nice balance between what you can and can't do. Yeah, number 2 on this, a lot of teaching ID relates to the development of reading and listening skills, as well as writing, of course. So these are very big parts of academic English. So for me, the main issue I have with dogma is the whole notion of everything being based around conversation, because I need to get them developing reading and listening because of the context in which they're going to be using English and they're going to be exposed to English. A few more issues. Okay. Dogma started with a vow of chastity, which meant I will not use a course book. I will only go into class and develop everything with no materials. And I honestly think that the amount of time and effort that goes into producing course books means that at some point you're going to be doing your students a disservice if you go too far down the line of not using materials. Maybe you're using the wrong course book, and that's a different issue. And I think a lot of people are using the wrong course book. But I would say never abandon all materials. Just be more considered in how you use materials. Okay, the next one. I didn't decide on this curriculum, but I'll get sacked if I told it away and do my own thing. This is very much the case here. So I can't just say, yep, I don't like this, what's on the thing here. So yeah, I have to stick to my curriculum. But one way I got around that was by joining the curriculum team and influencing the curriculum. So my advice to you is to do something like that if you're stuck with a course book you don't like. Yeah. So yeah, finally, if everything just emerges, why not follow a linear program of study anyway, if you're just waiting for it to emerge? Because you've got to remember you might be working with people who don't just say, oh, I need to know about this aspect of English. They might be sort of in a system where they're looking at the teacher to sort of lead things and say, well, this is what you need to know. Okay, so you have to bear that in mind as well. All right, so where are we? So these are still some of the constraints that I have to think about in my teaching, and so I can't just say, well, okay, I'm doing whatever I want. Come to my class, and we'll just let your learning happen, and I will guide you on the way. I still have the constraints of exams, a curriculum, a book that I have to use. Okay, so nevertheless, I feel that I can apply some of the principles of dogma and the apprenticeship model in my teaching. And as I'm moving towards the end of my talk, I'm going to give you a few examples of how I do this and how you might be able to do it as well. All right, so if you're in EAP, one thing you really need to do is think about the bigger picture. What are your macro outcomes? What do you need to do? Right, so this is a model that I follow, and this is something that I've helped develop in our curriculum at my school. So at the start, you're analyzing a prompt. The prompt itself might be going to a lecture, it might be a text, it might be an exam question, it might be an essay that you have to write. And moving from that, what we're trying to get our learners to do is selective and purposeful listening or reading, and from that taking notes, using this in discussion, and then giving some response. So that's the big picture of what I have to do as an academic English teacher. Going on to a slightly smaller scale, excuse me, sorry, try not to cough too much. So having looked at the bigger picture of what I need to do, this is a model that I think, this is what we follow at our school, and I think it's very useful for anybody to look at and think about if they're working in an academic context. And if you're not following something like this, then you might be missing out on something. So these are sort of the categories of objectives that we sort of try to get our students to look at, and this is what every time I take some material into class where I look in a book, I'm like, well, which of these am I going to do? So basically, first of all, we've got sort of defining something, then we have comparing or contrasting, cause and effect, describing a process, arguing, and using an academic style. And these are sort of, whenever I look at things, I'm like, well, I'm trying to advance my learners in one of these 6 areas at any one time. Okay, so I'm going to round up now by thinking about everything I've shown you today and 4 quick things that anybody can do at any point to try and sort of use these theories in their classroom. And these are things I do practically on a daily basis. So, what do? I negotiate daily outcomes. So, as I go into class, I say, well, this is the material we're going to use. These are the curriculum objectives. And by the end of the day, I hope we'll be able to. So this is something that my students learn to expect from me on a very regular basis, pretty much every day. So we're deciding what we're going to do, which of those categories we're looking at, defining something, comparing or contrasting, cause and effect, and then they decide. I often give the decision over with the input of me, a bit of language, a bit of grammar, some vocabulary, reading or listening. Using that input, by the end of the day, what are you going to know, and how are you going to show me that you know this? And very common ways I do of doing this are, the students will give a presentation to sort of show me what they know. they'll design a poster, or maybe they'll conduct a class debate. Any one of these. But it's handing over this choice of showing what they've learned during the day to the learners. Okay, secondly, look for opportunities for language to emerge. Alright, and so a typical sentence from me is, well, this text explains why the dinosaurs became extinct. So, class, do you know how to express cause and effect relationships? Not the most interesting of questions you'll ever hear, but nevertheless, I think you get the idea. So, it's bearing in mind I work with 18, 19-year-old students who start classes at 8:30 in the morning. They're not always really ready to say, okay, teacher, let's let some language emerge from our discussion today. So you have to look for chances where you can prompt this sort of idea of emerging and say, okay guys, we've done this. Do you know how to do it? Or not? Yes? Okay, a little bit? Okay, well let's try and develop that. So it's in a way, it's sort of forcing the idea of emerging language. And I don't care how much I sort of put into that, because, you know, I work with people who are tired and should probably still be in bed. But, yeah, so, you know, think about how you can do that. Okay, next up. Make your learners critically examine the materials you use. All right. Too often they'll be opening the book, they'll be presented with some knowledge, and that will be the truth to them. It happens in the way that they look through news, it happens with the way they use Facebook and things like this. They just see something and that's the truth for them. So find another resource, a video clip on YouTube that has the opposing stance to the text in the book, contains different facts, and get them to look at this and say, okay, why are these things different? Okay, and I'm going to try and rush a little bit because I'm using all of my hour up here. Okay, finally, do useful things out of class. And I say useful, and I should have underlined the word useful and sort of put some 15 exclamation marks after it. Don't give them busy work. Don't give them homework that has no purpose other than just to fill time. So you can do this very easily. Okay, so tomorrow in class I know I've got to do a listening that's about volcanoes. Okay, all right students, find 3 facts about volcanoes and share them with the class tomorrow. And then as they share their facts, you can say, okay, let's see if what you found is true, or let's see if what you found is similar to what's in the book. So they're already starting to think about it, and it's getting them engaged in the topic, but they're also taking the initiative and doing some of the learning for themselves. And another one, okay, here's a vocab list, learn the words tomorrow. Don't just do that. Get them to tell you what resource they used, what dictionary, and what they learned about it. Did they learn the collocations? Did they learn if it has positive and negative connotations? Did they learn the parts of speech? Get them to think about the process. So not only are they looking for the vocab, they're doing other things as well. So just get them thinking about their contribution to their own learning in this way. And that's about it. I wasn't proposing to sort of give you the absolute truth today, or to give you some kind of model that you can just take away, but I just hope that you could look at this apprenticeship model and perhaps Dogma ELT and think how it can have a slight influence and it can help us overcome some of those boundaries and limitations that still exist from this system that started 200 years ago. So thank you very much. I've really just begun my exploration of this, and if you're interested in it, please get in touch with me. I have a blog, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and my email address is here. I would very, very much love to hear from any of you who have any thoughts on this whatsoever. Thank you very much for attending. Let me stick a video up of me. Hey, okay. Thank you very much for sharing the last hour with me.